We are committed to creating a safe and supportive space for our guests and listeners, and to provide information and tools that will help our listeners understand, manage, and overcome trauma. We understand that the healing journey can bring up challenging emotions. Therefore, we want to warn our audience that certain episodes may contain discussions or stories that could be triggering for some individuals. The content of the podcast is for educational and informative purposes only, and we encourage you to practice self-care and discretion while listening, and to reach out to a trusted support system or professional if you feel overwhelmed and need help on your healing journey. Hello, Marie. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I'm really excited about what we're going to talk about, which is going to be relationships. And as I just mentioned before I started the recording, we could probably have numerous podcasts on this, right?
Absolutely, yes.
So why don't you tell us about yourself, and then we're going to get into a great conversation.
Sure. Thank you so much, Lisa. And thank you for having me, first and foremost. It's a pleasure to be here. So my name is Marie Cyba. I'm a certified life and relationship coach, and I work with women who are in committed relationships that feel really mediocre and blah. And I help them take those relationships from mediocre to mind-blowing through a combination of manifestation practices, mindset work, emotional practices, and behavioral changes.
Love it. I love it. That's cool. And today we're going to talk about something you brought up, and I can contribute a lot to this. So it's taking a toxic relationship to a healthy, loving relationship. And I was in 2 toxic relationships, and I was part of the toxicity. So I'm not saying that they, right. I was right there in it. So I'm not blaming the guys at all. So I have a lot to input as well, or probably even some questions, but I am now in a very loving, healthy relationship for both of us. And we both take it very serious. And we kind of talk about it like we have a bubble over our relationship, and it's a very protective bubble in what we let in and what we put out. So anyway, with that, why don't you tell us about what you did, changing from a toxic relationship to having a loving relationship now?
Yeah, sure. So I can definitely relate a lot to what you just said, right? Being part of that toxicity and being part of the problem. Like that was definitely my experience as well, you know? And for me, it was I grew up developing an avoidant attachment, which means that, I don't know if everyone is familiar with that term, but basically what it means is that I was hyper independent, right? Unable to accept help from anyone, let alone my partner. I was very closed off. I never talked about my feelings, and I just generally shut up all of my ex-partners. I never let them in. And the interesting thing is, I would compensate this lack of emotional intimacy in my relationships by causing drama. Right. So
I was on the opposite end of the spectrum with you. So you were hyper independent. I was hyper dependent.
Right.
I was seeking after it, but I did the same thing. I brought drama in. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. All the time. No, that's fine. So basically, like the cycle I would always go through in all of my past relationships was, me and my partner were good. Everything's great. Then they do something that I don't like. And instead of talking to them about it or dealing with it like on my own, but in a productive way, I would cause drama. For example, by not talking to them for several days, right? Giving them the silent treatment, or by being passive aggressive. And then at some point we would make up, but without ever really getting to the root cause of the issue at hand. So the underlying problem was never really solved. And so naturally the cycle just repeated itself over and over and over again. And it was like that in all of my relationships. And that was really like my contribution to it, right? That was my problem.
Yes. I recognize the cycles. Yeah. And I can remember, and I've mentioned this before, I see the cycle. I'm sitting back. I'm on this cycle. I see it happening. And I'm like, how do I stop this? How do I get out of this? I couldn't get out of it for the longest time.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. Because I like this whole time I thought, this is normal. This just happens in relationships. It just happens. That's the way it goes. Until, really until the last breakup that I went through in 2017. that was when I realized, okay, like something is wrong. Something's not right here. Because, I did have feelings for this guy. I wanted to make it work, but I realized I couldn't. I didn't know how. I
Hmm.
didn't know how to create a happy, healthy relationship with someone. I had no idea. And so that's really where the realization came. Okay, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the problem. And it
Common
was,
denominator.
yes, yeah. And it, of course, when you have that realization, it's difficult. It's difficult to come to the terms with the fact that it is you. But it's also
Mhm.
very liberating because if you're the problem, you can also be the solution,
Yes. It's
right?
empowering and liberating. Absolutely.
Yeah, for
Because
sure.
you can control this. You can't control that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and
Hmm.
that's really when everything changed for me, right? And that's when I decided, okay, I'm gonna be the solution. I'm gonna figure this out and I'm gonna heal what needs to be healed. And that's where my whole, like self-growth, self-improvement, healing journey began.
Excellent. And what I realized in my relationship, really in definitely the first relationship, the first marriage, and
Hmm.
into the second marriage, is I was 100% in survival mode.
Yeah.
For me, I was in survival mode. And so when you're in survival mode, all your anxiety and worries and everything are so high. And then something would happen in the relationship. And in the first relationship, there was a lot. So it was almost daily sometimes. That would send me over the top. And I
Right.
would completely lose it. I would lose control. I would scream. And we would do the same thing like you were saying, where we would eventually kind of calm down and talk a little bit about it, but not
Hmm.
get to the root and not get it resolved. And then again, that cycle kept going. But,
Yeah.
it would have been different if I wasn't quite in such survival mode, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, like, what I see with a lot of people is there is this reluctance to really open up and to be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
Oh,
and
yeah.
that's the reason why you never get to the root cause of the issue. Is because, you're stuck at that surface level
Mm-hmm.
and you only share a little part of, what was going on for you in that situation that was difficult for you and your partner to navigate.
Right.
And so
Right.
they do the same thing. And it's like, yeah, okay, I didn't like what you said. Yeah, I didn't like what you said either. Okay, I apologize. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry too. Okay.
Right. You just deal
And
with
that's
what I
the
call the
conversation.
symptoms. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're just dealing with the symptoms. You're not going, like you say, going deep into the root of what's causing both of you. And I can tell you, for me, there was so much shame, and I didn't
Mm,
have a safe place, and I didn't feel safe. And so being vulnerable wasn't going to happen. It absolutely was not going to happen for me. I wasn't vulnerable with anybody because it was never
yeah.
safe for me, right?
Yeah,
So what
me
did
too.
you do? What did you do to, begin your healing process, and how you kind of walked through that, and then where you're at today?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the first step is always awareness.
That's what
And
I
it
say.
was, yeah, it was definitely the first step for me is because, like, right now I can talk about it in a way where I'm like, okay, I developed an avoidant attachment and this is what that looked like. And this is what that caused me to do in all of my relationships. And this is how I showed up, right, with an avoidant attachment. Now I
Mm-hmm.
have this understanding, but it wasn't always like that.
Right. Right.
And so for me, like taking a step back and looking at myself, being like, why are you doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Why? And so I had to go into my past. And really, my avoidant attachment came from like my very first breakup, my very first heartbreak that I didn't know at the time. I was 15 at the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? When it happened, very young. And so I had no idea how to deal with any of the emotions that came with this heartbreak and this breakup. And it was very difficult for me. And I felt like, I couldn't really share those emotions and what was going on for me in that situation with anyone. And I
When you were
didn't know,
15?
yeah, like I
Mm,
didn't know how to talk to my friends about it, like let alone my family, let alone,
yeah.
like a therapist or whatever. And so I felt very isolated, very alone with my pain. And that's really where I began to like not open up anymore, not share anymore, not really let anyone in anymore. Because I was like, no one understands and probably no one cares either.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's also something that a lot of people tell themselves, like, no one cares
Yep.
about my feelings. And that's not
Mm-hmm.
true. And that's really not something that you want to tell yourself. But yeah, essentially, like I really had to understand where my patterns kind of came from.
Mm-hmm.
And then with that understanding, I was able to question all of the thoughts and the beliefs that were associated, with those particular ways of showing up. And I started to question those things. And I started to, like build a more positive belief system
Mm-hmm.
that would eventually like really propel me forward. And sometimes it's also just like, you know, thinking about who do I want to be in a romantic relationship, for example. Who do I want to be? And I had this very clear vision for,
Mm-hmm.
the woman and the partner that I wanted to become. And I knew exactly like how I wanted to show up in, a conflict situation, for example, like in an argument with my partner. I knew I wanted to stay calm and be in control of my emotions and be understanding and compassionate. And so when you have that very clear vision, then it's easier to really make it happen,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you go into like difficult situations prepared.
Right, right. And you've done your research and you've kind of have an idea of how you're going to be able to handle it.
Right. Right. And then it's just, stepping into that more healed, more evolved version of yourself every
Mm-hmm.
single day.
Mm-hmm.
And of course you're going to fall off the wagon, right? And you're
Yes.
going to go back to your old self, quote unquote.
Yes. Yes.
And yeah, sometimes it's just not going to work out, and that's okay too.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay too. You just
Yes.
start anew every single day.
Right. You forgive yourself and you move forward. Because I know, for me, that's exactly what I did. I had the vision of what I wanted it to look like and how I wanted to handle it, because I know how vicious I can be. I call it the old Lisa, and I can be
Right.
vicious, and that is not who I want to be. That does not feel good. And coming down from being that upset is exhausting. And because I did it for so
Mm.
many years, I didn't notice it. And I don't get that upset now like that at all. I don't allow myself. I'm able to manage that much better. But, still, when I get upset, it doesn't feel good. And I want to do things to resolve. But one thing that is very different, as you were just mentioning, what you were talking about, kind of brought to my mind was where my mindset was there and where it is today when I'm in a conflict. And it was so scattered and made no sense. And I was triggered, and anything and everything came out of my mouth, and, it was just out of control. Right. And now I have learned to take a pause
Mm.
and think about it and really look at it. Am I being triggered? Is this something really upsetting to me? And then figure out a way to manage it or to handle it, and then respond. And it has been empowering. And because what's not fun? Cleaning up your mess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's not fun.
So not fun.
No, no.
So not fun. Yeah. And that is something that I had to do all the time in all of my past relationships, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just because when you act in a way that's like really irrational and that, your partner just can't understand, like, because
Yeah.
how can your partner understand you if you don't tell them what's going on with you
Right. If
and
you
why
can't
you're giving
express it.
them, right? And why you're giving them the silent treatment for like a week straight.
Right. Right.
How should they know what's
Right.
going on? And so then when finally you're ready to like step out of that, and then, you're ready to like kind of like make up, and, you go to your partner and you're like, oh, I'm sorry. My bad. Sorry. Like that's not fun, right? That's not fun for yourself. That's not fun for your partner, because at some point,
Mm-mm.
like the first 2, 3 times things like that happen, your partner's probably like, okay, well, that was a little bit weird, but whatever, we'll just keep going. But after months and months of the same shit
Yeah.
over and over again,
Mm-hmm.
like it gets to a point, like for your partner as well, where they're like, this is not working and we're
No,
not making any progress, right? It's the same stuff all over again every
no,
single time.
no, no. I can remember that. And just that helpless feeling that I had back then, of not knowing, seeing that you're on the cycle, seeing that it's repeating itself. I mean, you can literally watch it coming and then you watch it happen and you're like, how do I stop that? So,
Yeah. Yeah, but that's actually, I think, a very important step in the process, right? Is first of all, that awareness. And
mm-hmm,
most of the time, like when you start working on yourself and you start like working on your like self-reflection and awareness and all those things, what will happen is you will do the same things you always do, but then after the thing happened, after you acted in that way, you ask yourself, okay, why did I do that?
mm-hmm,
I want to do differently the next time. I want to show up differently.
yeah,
You start to develop that awareness in hindsight.
right.
That's the first step. And then the more that you practice that, the better you become at, being aware of your own actions, of your thoughts, of your feelings. And then slowly but surely, you'll be able to change in that moment
Mm-hmm.
and
You'll
realize
feel
it
it.
in that moment. Yeah.
Yeah,
And not
you'll
just in hindsight.
recognize it. Mm-hmm. And then you'll
Yeah.
be able to, the best thing to do is, okay, I see this is happening. I'm going to take a breath. I'm just going to take a minute. And sometimes I'll even say, you know what? I need a minute. I need to go process. I need to kind of I just
Yeah,
need a
me
minute.
too.
And it's not, the communication is what's so hard because it can be so misunderstood on the other side. If I just turned around and walked away, right? Why are you turning around
Yeah.
and just walking away? Instead of looking at him and saying, look, I need a minute. I just need a minute. I'm going to go in the other room. I'm just going to take a minute. And it's
Yeah,
so empowering.
definitely. And this is something that I do in my own relationship as well,
Me too.
right? When me and my partner, we have arguments and I notice that my emotions are running hot and I feel like I'm losing control, right? You want to catch yourself in that moment.
Yes.
Really, like before it happens, you
Mm-hmm.
want to feel like, okay, this is getting out of hand. I need a break. And then, of course, what you don't want to do is just turn around and walk away.
Right.
Because then,
Right.
as you said, your partner's going to be like, okay. But you want to just tell your partner. And that's really where so many people go wrong. And it doesn't have to be this hard, right? You just tell your partner the truth of what's going on for you in that moment. You can be
Mm-hmm.
like, you know what? I noticed like I'm losing control here and I don't want to say things that I later regret. And so I'm just going to need a minute here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's fine. Like you can do that, right? There's
Yes.
nothing wrong with that. On the contrary, this is really like what you want to do.
Yes. And one thing that I found is I used to carry so much shame in how I felt and the thoughts going through my head and how I behaved that I just didn't want to deal with it. And what has switched for me, and this is huge, is that, okay, this is some of the symptoms that, what's going on, and I can express it to him. And I can tell him, okay, this is going to sound crazy. This is what's going on in my head. I know it's not right, but this is what's going on. And, it helps him certainly. And it certainly helps me. And a lot of times as you're speaking stuff out, it loses its grip on you. Does that make
Mm-hmm.
sense? Like I
Yes.
have found that to be so true because as soon as it comes out of your mouth, you're like, well, that was kind of okay, that doesn't make any sense. And then you can dismiss it or, take care of it. And that has been, for me, that's really kept me out of that place of being a screamer.
Mm. Yeah. So important.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time, what you'll find is that your partner, like, even though they might not go through the exact same thing, or, they might not have had the exact same experiences as you, but they will be able to relate to, what you feel and
Right.
what's going on in your head. Most likely. Not all
Right.
the
Right.
time and not, everyone, but most of the time, because all of the time we're like, oh my God, I'm weird, I'm crazy, or,
Hmm.
people can't relate to what I'm going through. But that's not true. That is
Right.
not true. Whatever it is that you're dealing with right now, whatever it is, there are other people in this world who are going through something similar or have gone through something similar. You are not alone and you are normal, period. Whatever you're going through, you're
Hmm.
normal and it's really okay. And chances are your partner's going to, when you start sharing those things with your partner, what's going to happen most likely is they're going to be like, oh,
Hmm.
now I understand. Now I
And it's
understand. Thank you for telling me that.
and it's going to draw you closer. It
Absolutely.
really, it sounds crazy, but it will draw you closer. It gives my husband a better understanding of me. He knows my story, and
Yes.
I am much more vocal anymore about saying, like, and I've shared this on several podcasts, but a few months ago, I walked through my first trigger from beginning to recognizing it was a trigger and doing the whole steps. And in that, he was part of, he's really one of my number one safe spaces. And I can be crazy and he still loves me and he just smiles at me and, he gives me grace. And it was the first time in my life where I recognized I was being triggered. I vocalized what was going on in my head with him, and I just looked at him. I said, I know this sounds crazy. I know I'm clearly being triggered because makes no logical sense what's coming out of my mouth. And my usual response would have been to do something self-depreciating, something that would hurt myself, right? Instead of doing the thing that I really need to do. And as I was saying it, and he was just smiling, he was driving the car and he was just smiling at me. And I said, we're going to go do the right thing and we're going to go take care of this. And he said, let's go. And it was so refreshing when you can have that kind of relationship. So how do we get those? How do we find these guys or women or the partner? How did you do it? How did you get to that place where you found this person that you just feel completely safe with?
Yeah. So that's a very interesting question, right? It's the $1 million question that
Yes.
everyone wants to know the answer to. And I really think that it starts with yourself. You have to become that person yourself first, right? Because like me with my avoidant attachment, like who would have felt safe with me? No
Right.
one. No one,
True.
because yeah, I wasn't able to hold anyone else's emotions. I wasn't even able to hold my own emotions.
Hmm.
So there was no way for anyone to feel really and truly safe with me. And so I had to become that safe space for myself, first and foremost, right? I had to lose the fear of my own emotions because that is really what it is. And I know that's the case for so many people out there. We're scared of
Hmm.
negative emotions, right?
Yeah.
And that's really where a lot of our problems come from, is that unwillingness to feel and experience uncomfortable emotions and to deal with them. And so we push them
Hmm.
away, we avoid them, we indulge in over Instagramming, overeating, over
Hmm.
drinking, watching porn, all of those like coping mechanisms and behaviors, they really serve the purpose of us not feeling our feelings. And so really that's where you have to start. If you want to be in a safe and healthy relationship, you have to become that person first, and then that's
Exactly.
what you're going to attract. And
Yes.
honestly, like the relationship I have with my fiance now, it is also very different than what it
Hmm.
used to be like at the very beginning.
Oh,
Because
interesting.
yeah, because it wasn't like all rainbows and daisies from the get-go for us. That wasn't the case at all. It was hard work at the beginning because,
Hmm.
when I met him, I had already stepped into like a more healed, more evolved version of myself. But I was still healing. I was still in the process, of course. So there were still a lot of triggers for me. And he came into the relationship with an anxious attachment, right? And if you're familiar with, attachment styles, anxious is basically the polar opposite of avoidant, right? Where I would like not want to talk about my feelings, where I would retreat into myself. He was like he wanted more of me. So yeah,
That's me.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
right. So you know
Yeah.
exactly what
Yeah.
that feels like.
Yeah.
So he was, like very controlling, very jealous, like always demanding so much of me that I wasn't ready to give.
Mm-hmm.
And so naturally, there was a lot of conflict, a lot of fights, to be honest, that sometimes
Mm-hmm.
like did get ugly. And it was a lot of work for both of us to
Yeah.
overcome those difficulties and those challenges. And also, like what it required for me in particular was also setting very, very firm boundaries with him,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
I got on the one hand, like I was compassionate. I did understand like where this behavior came from, right?
Right.
I knew that he had been cheated on in the past. I knew that his parents had had a very difficult relationship, and that was, where this anxious attachment
Mm-hmm.
like really came from. I knew this, I understood it. I had compassion for him. Yet at the same time, like I wasn't ready to be controlled. And I
Right.
wasn't ready to deal with all of his jealousy all the time.
Right.
And so
Nor
I
should
had
you.
to say, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And that is also something that I really wish more people knew how to do is setting and enforcing boundaries,
Right.
right? Because they can really save your relationship. They
They can
sure
make them or
saved
break
mine.
them.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. Absolutely. And so I set those boundaries. And at the same time, like he started working on himself too, because he
Mm.
knew that, if nothing changed and if he didn't manage his anxiety and his anxious attachment, it wasn't going to work out.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
he
that's not a good
knew,
feeling for him either to live like that. Trust
no,
me. Yeah.
no. Yeah, and I mean, he could also like really see his own triggers and his own behaviors
Mm.
that just make no like rational sense at all. And he was also like, okay, I know I need to change, like not only for the sake of this relationship, but for me,
Yeah.
right? For me, so that I can heal.
Yeah.
And that's really what it was like for us. And so I don't really believe in this idea of, I just have to find the one. I just have to find my soulmate, without changing myself, without
Right.
healing myself. Because we all have emotional baggage. We all have wounds that we haven't healed.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we just wait for someone else to fix everything for us, we're going to wait a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I realized that, and I shared that with my son, when he began dating,
Mm-hmm.
I shared that with him, and I have a very wise son. I joke that he's got an old soul in him, and he really does. He was really into his academics, and when he was ready to enter into the, dating world, that was the tip that I gave him, is that, you really need to work on yourself and be happy with yourself before you, get into a relationship. I said, I put the responsibility on your father to make me happy. And that's so true. And it was something he would never be able to fulfill. It wasn't fair to put that on him. And I just remember thinking, well, he should be doing that and I'll be happy. And for so long didn't stop and realize that I need to create the happiness within myself. And it wasn't until, when I went from my first marriage to my second marriage, there wasn't a lot of time in between. And it was because of my mindset of, oh, I got to find someone that loves me because nobody loves me, kind of thing. But I had done a measure of healing, but entered into a very narcissistic second marriage. I mean, full on gaslighting, everything. And I didn't know at the time what the term was. I didn't realize, like that was what it was until later. But I had become healthy enough to know that I'm not doing this. This is crazy, because it didn't switch until after we got married. Of course, when I look back on, the whole situation, I can see a lot of signs that I didn't see before. But I was healthy enough to realize this is not good. Tried to get help, and it didn't work. Unfortunately, he passed away, but we probably would have ended up in divorce. And that is when I really started to take a look at myself and understand that I needed to first love myself, because I didn't. And I
Mm.
can tell you the voice in my head really didn't love me. It was very, very critical. And once I started doing that and starting to embrace that, is when that deeper healing began, where I could enter into a much healthier relationship. And my now third marriage, which is the last, it's going to last forever. Same thing with us. It wasn't an easy start. It wasn't an easy start. We both had worked on ourselves, but we were both still on our healing journey and growing journey, and still am. And there were some bumps along the way. And I too had to set some really firm boundaries. And it was either going to move forward or we were going to go our separate ways. And
Yeah.
and it worked. And it's been such a great journey. And he keeps saying it keeps getting better, and it does. It really does.
Same here. Same here. No, and I love the fact that you touched on self-love here,
Mhm.
because I also think that that is such a crucial part of it all, right? Because if you love yourself so much that you're not willing to be in an unhealthy relationship that really doesn't work for you, that doesn't fulfill you, where there's abuse, maybe even.
Mhm. Yeah.
If you can do that and you can be like, you know what, I love myself so much, I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
Like that is being powerful.
That is being very powerful. And it doesn't mean that it's not going to be still difficult to go through, but when
Yeah.
you know that you're doing the right thing, you're able to get through it and learn from it. And I was shocked that I entered into that. But you know what? I completely went against my intuition from the very beginning. And so I don't like to talk badly about him because it was my fault. I went against my intuition. So, if I would have listened to my intuition, I would have never gone there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that is what I think so many people, they struggle kind of like with this dance between, I'm responsible for myself, and like my partner is just treating me badly. I mean, yeah, of course, there is such a thing as a victim and a perpetrator. Of course, like if there's abuse, of like,
Yes.
like you said in your example, narcissistic abuse, like that is a real thing. But the question you want to ask yourself is, why am I here? Why am
Yes.
I putting up with unacceptable behavior? Why? And
That
as
was the
soon as
big
you,
question.
yeah, as soon as you start asking that question, like that is when things really change for you.
Yes, because I realized, I realized it was a bad marriage, and it was, a few years later where I saw that it was a narcissistic relationship. And I'm like, okay, so how did I end up in a narcissistic relationship? And then I look back on my past and there's narcissism in my family. Well, of course, that's why I just went to what I knew. I just followed into what I knew, you know, and yeah, it was interesting. And then I had to sit down and go, okay, how do I avoid that the next time? Because I won't do that, and I'm definitely at a point in my life where I have absolute boundaries that I will absolutely enforce.
Yeah. Yeah. But for you, like, I'm curious, did you experience like some sort of um, guilt around this? Like when you ask yourself the question, okay, how did I end up here? Like, how did I get
Hmm.
into a relationship with a narcissist? Was there any sort of like judgment on your
Oh,
part, like self-judgment?
oh yeah, yeah. And that was something I had to forgive myself for.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because, again, if I hadn't made that decision, I wouldn't have gone through that. Right. So it really lands on me. And yeah, I was, for a while, it was like, what was I thinking, kind of a thing. And then sitting down, okay, oh, okay, that makes sense why I did that. Then I was really able to forgive myself. Well, yeah, I did it blindly because I wasn't using the self-awareness
Hmm.
or listening to the self-awareness because it was telling me. And I was able to forgive myself and realize, okay, that's why I did it, and give myself some grace.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that is so
I did.
important. And
Hmm.
that's where a lot of people get stuck.
Yeah.
Like, once they realize, oh, wait, I did something that I didn't want to do. I ended up in a situation that I didn't want to be in. Oh my God, everything's my fault.
Yeah. It
I'm
wasn't
so I'm
something that
so
I fell
stupid.
into. Yeah. It wasn't
Yeah.
something that I just, oh, and it's, I had the warning signs and I didn't listen. And what fueled that for me was just like when I met my first husband, I had a belief system that nobody liked me. Well, then nobody's
Mm.
certainly going to love me. Right. And then this man comes along and he's literally, I believed he was the only man in the world that would love me. So I had to marry him. I had to marry him because
Of
finally
course.
I found someone that loved me. So here we go. And then it was still there, obviously, for the second marriage, not as intense as it was in the first one, but that was a motivating factor that made me override my intuition telling me don't even talk to him, to full on jumping into a marriage with the man.
Yeah.
And so that was the feeling. And I didn't have that going into my, because I had worked through healing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is so important. Like the part where you forgive yourself is such a crucial part of your journey, like of everyone's healing journey.
It
Because
is.
a lot of the time, like what happens when you like understand yourself and you have that self-awareness and you can look back on something and be like, what was I doing there? Like what was
Mm-hmm.
going on? That's where most people like tend to put like all the blame on themselves,
Oh yeah.
right? Like, oh my God, I was so stupid. How could I? Like, how did I not see this? Like, what the hell?
Yes.
I should have done differently. Yeah,
The
but you
overwhelming
didn't.
shame.
Yeah. Yeah.
Overwhelming.
And yeah. And for like in your case, I imagine like the thought or the belief of like, no one likes me and
Mm-hmm.
no one loves me. Like, where did that come from?
It literally came from my brother. He literally told me that when I was about
Okay.
11 years old. But even before that, the abuse just confirmed it. The abuse before he said that to me by both my parents and my brother, and after just confirmed it. And so then I had the filter on my eyes of nobody likes me. And that's how I walked into every relationship.
Yeah. And that is not your fault.
No,
That is
no,
not your fault. And it doesn't serve you to tell you anything else,
right.
right?
It was
It was
crippling.
literally like as a kid, as an 11-year-old, you were literally told by a family member that no one likes you.
Mm-hmm.
And so of course, your brain, like as a child, you don't have that mechanism where you go like, is that true? Like, why
Right.
would you say that to me? Like, that's not true. You don't have that, and you just soak it up like a sponge, and you're like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
that has to be true. Like, if my brother
absolutely.
tells me that, it has to be true,
Right.
right?
And I did. I
And be
100% believed it.
yeah, and because you have a human brain that hates change, that thought, it just kept spinning,
Mm-hmm.
and your
Mm-hmm.
brain just kept entertaining it.
Mm-hmm. And then I went into every situation, of course, with that mindset. So then guess what I saw? And I would imagine my energy that I was emanating wasn't very positive either, right? It was,
Yeah, probably not.
yeah, yeah. Because I'm a very different person today than I used to be. Like I engage with people. It's interesting how much that crippled me. And it really did.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's important to understand that. And it's important to realize none of it was your fault, even though we ended
Mm-hmm.
up in those relationships, the narcissistic abuse and all the things. Yeah, I mean, you chose those partners and you chose to stay in those relationships, for a certain period of time, but it wasn't really your fault because
Mm-hmm.
you were like your brain was operating on like a default mode.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And that has been so freeing in my healing journey is really, you can say, I know people like me and you can, hear it, but you got to really know it. And for a long time, I didn't really know it. And now I really know it. And does everybody love me? No. Does everybody like me? No. And I'm okay if they don't. Where before it would be just tragic because
Yeah.
you filter into that abandonment and it's just a really bad soup of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Like what's different now? You love yourself. You
Hmm.
like yourself. And so you
Hmm.
don't need everyone else to like you, to love you. And that's really the difference.
Right.
Right.
And I'm not alone anymore.
Yeah.
I can be alone and I'm not alone. And that's really cool. I mean, it's just not this desperate thing of trying, not just my, romantic relationships, but my friendships as well. I had to have all these people because it would just validate me. And that's not anybody else's fault. It's just, that was a belief system I had, and that was the way I behaved in relationships.
Yeah.
And I put up
Yeah.
with a lot of stuff that I did because I had to have that relationship, because I had to have someone like me. I mean, it was just talk about a vicious cycle.
Cycle. Yes. Yeah. But it's so, so good that you were able to break this pattern and this vicious cycle and step out of it
Mm,
and change. Yeah.
yeah.
That is
So
so
tell us,
amazing.
tell us about the relationship now. I heard you say fiance, so you're going to be getting married.
Yes. Yeah. So we got engaged like literally 2 weeks ago. So
Oh,
it's thank you
congratulations.
so much.
That's exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. So right now, obviously we're on cloud nine.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So that's the situation right now. But even before the engagement, like as I said, like the beginning of our relationship, it was tough. Definitely. We did
Hmm.
have a lot of challenges, a lot of obstacles to overcome. But I would say like that was maybe the first year and a half of our relationship. It was really rocky.
Hmm.
But then something clicked.
Yeah.
And that's really when everything changed. And now, like honestly, I've never been as happy as I
Mm.
am now, like in any of my previous relationships. I've never felt as seen and understood
Mm.
and loved for who I am as I do now. Like it's
It's beautiful.
insane. And like looking back on my past relationships now, I'm like why was I even putting up with that? Like how could I think that that was normal?
Hmm. I know. I
The
know.
difference is so huge.
Yeah. And that's the same thing with us. It's like it was a little rough year and a half. And then the same thing, it clicked. And the reason why I bring this up is both us and you and your fiance, we're all working on ourselves. That's
Yes.
why it worked. The men were working on themselves, we were working on ourselves, and which helped us when there was conflict or there was something. We would, like with my husband and I, we have always been able to sit down and talk. Maybe not at the moment, but later on, we would always sit down and talk about it. And as the relationship has evolved, it has become a safe place. And as I feel safer, I'm able to open up, which is huge. And I can, express myself. And it's same with you, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Like in my relationship, there is nothing that we don't talk about. Like there is
Hmm.
nothing that's off limits. And
I know
that,
it's hard.
yeah, it is extremely hard sometimes. It is. And sometimes, I still don't feel like talking about my emotions. I still feel
Yeah.
like shutting down and shutting him out. That
Hmm.
that still comes up because it's just so deeply ingrained in my psyche.
Right.
But now I'm able to handle it. Now I'm able to observe myself and that little voice in my head that tells me, I know, you just punish him. He doesn't deserve that let him in and tell him about your face. He doesn't deserve it. And now when I hear this voice in my head, like, nope, we're not going there. And I really try to always step back into this higher version of myself,
Yes.
which relates back to, what I talked about earlier, that vision that you have for yourself and who you want to be. I try to keep that vision alive like every single day and ask myself, who do I want to be today? Do I want to be right or do I want to be happy? Do I want to listen
Hmm.
to my ego or do I want to step into like my highest version and be the best partner I could possibly be?
Yeah.
And it's a never ending journey, really. Like you never get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm done. I'm healed now.
Right. 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 No.
You get closer to that point, but it's never there's never really an end point, and that's okay.
No, that's okay. You just get stronger. You get stronger, wiser, and yeah, that's wonderful. I love it.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
tell us how people can reach you, because I'm sure that people would be interested in hearing more about this and maybe get some coaching from you.
Yes, absolutely. So the best place to reach out is Instagram. That's where I'm most active. People can reach out. Like my handle is that relationship coach. Just, feel free to drop me a message or leave a comment or whatever. Get in touch there. I also have a free guide on how to stop fighting with your partner. So people can download that, and we can put the link to that in the show notes. Um, my website is currently under construction. I'm doing a
Okay.
little revamp. But yeah, if you just follow me on Instagram, then you'll also know when my site is going to be back up.
And we're going to have
And
all your links, listed as well.
yeah, perfect. Yeah, so that's how people can reach me.
Well, thank you so much. This has been really good. Like I said, I'm probably going to have you back on for talk about, one of the things I'd love to talk about at some point is about friendships, because that's
Oh,
adult
yeah.
friendships. Woo. We could have a whole episode on that, because that's a challenging one.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is. Yeah, I'd love to talk about that for sure. Let's
Yeah.
do it.
Okay. We'll do that next year for sure. We'll get you back on and we'll talk about friendships and
Yeah,
how we can do it
awesome.
as adults. I know that Mel Robbins did a really good podcast on that. It was really enlightening, just kind of
Hmm.
giving me an understanding of why it can be so challenging. But we could even go deeper than that. I mean, it's just because it is. And I know there's a lot of us that struggle with it. I mean, deep
Oh,
relationships.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Definitely. And that is something I feel like I also have lots and lots to share about, because
Mm-hmm.
I've also, like, right now, like, I'm going through a phase where really my friendships are changing,
Me too.
and it's not always easy to navigate that. And also,
No.
like, finding new friends when
Mm-hmm.
you're an adult, so hard.
Like-minded people. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. It's a challenge. I mean, the cool thing about doing this podcast, I have met some, tons of like-minded people and great people.
Yeah.
It's awesome, so it's in my niche, but it is hard to, it is hard to find them and then maintain them. And sometimes people are just in your life for a season or a reason, and sometimes
Yeah.
they're in it for a lifetime.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. But I'd love
okay,
to dive
go
deeper
ahead, go
into
ahead.
that topic for sure.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's critical. So I'll get you on the books again for next year, because I think it would be
Awesome.
really good. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
let's do
thank you
that.
so much for being on the podcast. This was a great conversation. I know it's helpful to people, and I appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, Lisa. This was such a great experience. I loved being on the show.
Well,
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.